everybody. Welcome to the Peace Building Podcast. It's great to be back here again with all of you. It's the dead of winter here in the United States, middle of February, but the sounds of spring are really popping up all over the place. The sun is warm, the birds are singing, which is nice, but it's also kind of disturbing as it's 2 months early. So, I don't know, my hunch is that nature is giving us a big wake-up call. Another thing that is standing out to me these days is the President of the United States' budget proposal, which is slashing basically all kinds of programs that meet people's basic needs and the needs of the environment, and putting a lot more money into the military. Now, I don't like getting too partisan on this podcast, but as someone who's interested in moving this planet to the next level and getting rid of our very anachronistic war system, it seems like a really bad idea because, obviously the fundamentally frustrated needs are what cause conflict. And when people can't get their needs met, they get upset. And also, as does an increase of weaponry around the world. So, whatever. Another thing that stands out is the Me Too movement, which has been extraordinary in its massiveness and spontaneousness, and how much it took everybody by surprise. I think to some degree it's not just in the United States. It is global, but it's definitely in the United States. I think has been such a transformation, and really been amazing how women have been coming together, really feeling the courage to stand up together and break the collusion of silence and with perpetrators, and find the courage together to no longer protect offending men. So it's been really exciting to see. It's certainly not the whole picture, but it is a huge beginning. So these themes, the weather, the President of the United States' proposed budget, and the Me Too movement, I think are all connected and bring me to the focus of this episode of the Peace Building Podcast. I think peace is possible. I'm not the only, it's not just a Pollyanna-ish hope, if you know that cultural reference, but one that's based on some serious work of some serious people. John Horgan from episode 10, who wrote a book called The End of War. He's a Scientific American writer. Bill Urey, the Nobel Nominee Scilla Elworthy, who just wrote a book called The Business Plan for Peace, and will be a guest, an upcoming guest on the show very shortly, so stay tuned. All of these people, I think, feel that peace is in our grasp, and I would like to say within our lifetime. As I've said, I think the key to planetary peace is to empower women, and a key to doing that is to move beyond patriarchal models in family systems and in organizations, the two building blocks of our world. Riane Eisler described in the last episode very elegantly the connection between cultures that have very authoritarian or patriarchal family cultures and those that support militarism at the level of the state. I wanted to explore more about the connection between gender, organizational culture, and building a more peaceful world. And I thought I knew no better person to do this than Professor Peter Hawkins. Professor Hawkins, or Peter, has been working with companies for decades on leadership, culture, and change initiatives. He's based in the UK, is a leading expert in what he calls systemic team coaching, which I got trained by him in, and I think of as kind of the infrastructure for building collaboration in systems, very much like the training I received from the Gestalt Organization and Systems Design Program. I'm obviously going to put his amazing bio on the site so you can read more about him. But the other reason, kind of on a more personal note, is just to talk about him, the person, in addition to his professional creds, which are incredible. But the other reason I wanted to talk to Peter is because some of the things that he he talks about and does in his work that just really stood out to me. One is that he gets executive teams to be thinking very intentionally or holding their collective grandchildren as a stakeholder when they make decisions. He puts empty chairs out for them, or sometimes has them sit in those chairs to be thinking about the implications for their decisions on their collective grandchildren. He does this. He asks leaders to be thinking about what their granddaughters or great-granddaughters would be saying to them about the impact of the decisions that they're making. And he does the same with invoking the stakeholder of the environment. He likes to be thinking, as he says, forward, back, outside, in. And his models are really brilliant and beautiful. So here are a few highlights to listen for in this episode. Peter will address, and very eloquently so, my question about whether there is a relationship between getting gender and diversity right inside organizations and creating a more harmonious world. And will say that indeed there is. He will address the idea that the era of heroic leadership is dead and gone, and that there's an urgent need we face to develop collective leadership and collaborative intelligence. He will talk about what men and women can do together as leaders in our places of work that we couldn't do apart, and why this is so critically important for our organizations today. He will speak directly to men in organizations, whether they are leadership or rank and file, and provide valuable guidance about how to think and proceed in this Me Too era. He will address the need for companies to really rethink their career design model, which he says is designed for 20th century men, not 21st century human beings. He will address a question that always nags at me about how can companies get gender right and still stay competitive. In other words, not feel like they're doing the right thing, but falling behind because of it in a hyper-competitive world. And lastly, he will talk poignantly about the impact of absentee fathers, either because of wars or work, and give us, as the sane global parent that he is, some profound words of wisdom to guide us as we go forward into this complex and exciting future. So, Professor Hawkins, Peter, I think I can call you Peter. It's so grateful for your time. I think you bring a tremendous amount of creds to this topic, I think. And the topic, you bring a lot of wisdom, a lot of experience. And I know also, like when I first met you, the fact that you were talking about how interveners in organizations, leaders need to be thinking outside, forward, back, outside in, I think was your language. And that you wanted people to really be thinking about a much wider swath of stakeholders in everything that they did, and that you invoked. I loved. I think that you invoked your grandchildren right away as a stakeholder to all your incredible work with organizational systems and nature. So that those were two stakeholders that were standing out, as well as all the more obvious people that you might expect inside an organizational system. And so anyway, and I know you've been married for 40 years. You have 5, I think, grandchildren. And I think as the professor, the pracademic that you've been, I think you call yourself that, you've had tremendous experience in, I think, 25 countries or more with businesses, probably lots of Fortune 500 companies. And you're one of the greatest thinkers of, systemic team coaching, which I think of as kind of the infrastructure, if you will, of building collaboration in systems. So I wanted to get to it. I'm focused on gender here.
Indeed.
And, gender is obviously a little touchy topic these days. It seems to be everywhere too. It's just kind of like amazing to me. It seems to be on TV and newspapers. And every time you look around, there's something about the Me Too movement. And I know I was just talking to a colleague and about some work we might do in a largely blue collar organization, mostly it's a utility, lots of very male dominated. And that how much men are how much shaking, quaking is happening among a lot of men, worrying about where's the axe going to fall next, some anger, irritation. So there's a lot of strong feelings, I think, among women, among men, and a lot of this is happening inside organizations and with regard to work. So I wanted to just, get right to it and get your voice in here, and just as somebody who's such a scholar and practitioner of organizational culture, what do you think organizational culture has to do with, and shifting in organizational culture has to do with becoming a more harmonious world? Why is this important, not just for the particular organization, but for the world in which the organization exists?
Well, thank you, Susan. I think you've raised a number of very important and significant inquiries. I have often said that if the last 30 years of working with organizations and with leadership teams has been about the journey of helping us move from an over-focus on IQ and analytic intelligence to EQ and emotional intelligence, that the next 30 years are going to be more about how do we move from IQ to WeQ, or from individual intelligence to collaborative and collective intelligence. And that's because I think we're moving into a phase where the challenges for any organization, small ones, large ones, governmental organizations, the not-for-profit, or what I prefer to call the for-benefit organizations, and commercial organizations, all of them are facing the level of challenging complexity. We talk about the VUCA world, the volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous world, but I think this certainly kind of is a kind of a catchphrase underneath that. Every organization is having to deal with a level of complex change, but a level of interconnection. So we're in a hyper-connected world. And that means the days of heroic CEOs and heroic team leaders is dead and gone. Today, we need collective leadership teams that are more than the sum of their parts, where everybody in the team can represent the whole team, not just their function. And that's requiring us to develop what I call WeQ, or collaborative intelligence. And that means that if the last 30 years of diversity was about how do we get more women into the top leadership teams and more women to the boards, that's what I would call diversity 001.
Yeah.
Let's get better representation. But the next stage of diversity is about how do we utilize that diversity? How do we have diversity of gender, age, cultural background, and not just representation into the leadership team, but utilizing that diversity to create a collective intelligence that's far more than some of their parts. So to be very practical about that, how many meetings do your listeners go into in their work or in their church or in a community organization that really generates thinking from the group and from the team that wasn't in other people's heads when they started?
Yeah. How do you create that exponential potential, I call sometimes, of getting people together? And the 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2; it equals perhaps 3 or 4.
Yes. Sometimes I talk about the collaboration dividend.
Okay. Uh-huh.
That comes from the collaboration. David Bohm, who was a great nuclear physicist, at the end of his life, he started to look at the whole area of how do we change cultures, and that being absolutely critical given the challenges that are now facing the Earth, the globe, the human species, and the more than human world. And he was saying, at essence, this was all about culture. And he had a nice phrase for this thing about collaborative intelligence. He said, in most of our meetings, we spend our time exchanging pre-cooked thoughts. Mm-hmm. I tell you, Susan, what I know, you tell me what I know. And he says, thoughts are different from thinking. Thinking is always cooking together live, coming up with new thinking, going to the edge of what we know.
Yeah, so
between us.
Yeah. So, I know I had Dr. Riane Eisler on this show a little while ago, and she has, she talks a lot about models of partnership and models of domination, and she cites some theoretical work about how there's a correlation between what happens inside families and, for instance, cultures with more authoritarian families also seem to be more militaristic at the level of the state. And I don't really know about that with organizations, but, this is the Peace Building Podcast, and we are focusing on, systemic thinking. Do you think there's a relationship between, we're sort of talking about it, but do you think there's a relationship between developing that collaborative intelligence inside organizational systems and creating a more harmonious world?
Absolutely, because let me just take it on to another level. I wrote a blog. You mentioned I've been married for 40 years, but just before my 40th wedding anniversary. And I don't think
that's a lot of experience. That's a lot of hands-on experience.
I wrote a blog which said, partnerships are not created by partners, which was a very provocative title. And I was trying to link what happens in marriages to what happens in organizational mergers to what happens in leadership teams. And I was saying, look, we used to think that leadership teams would go away and create a vision and a mission for their organization. But actually, that was thinking the wrong way around. That actually it's the mission or vision that creates the team, not the team that creates the mission. Mm. If you like, the need is already out there in the world, waiting for a leadership team to respond. Mm. And we know from all the research, and I've kind of reviewed all the best research on team effectiveness, that it's not having good relationships, and that's nice to have in a team, but that's not what makes a team really effective. What makes a team really effective is that they have a collective purpose that they've all bought into, which they recognize they can only achieve through collaboration. And I think this is so important, whether we're doing peace work, mediation, we're working at the intergovernmental level or any level, that actually what's really important is to always ask the question, what is it we can do together that we cannot do apart? What is the purpose to which we are both in service? And in a marriage, of course, that changes, regularly. When you first come together, the purpose might be that we have more fun time when we're together than when we do when we're apart. Or, we have, we feel great about ourselves and we excite each other's happiness. Then it might be, well, actually, we can live together better than when we can live apart. And then it might be having children together, and then they go up and leave home. We've got to find a new purpose. we do know that the best marriages are built on knowing what we can do together that we can't do apart.
Mm-hmm.
And many years ago, just to relate it to peace, I was speaking on a panel at a conference and somebody said it was a time of Bush and Blair. And they said, well, if you were working with that relationship, President Bush and Tony Blair, what would you say to them? And I paused for a while and I said, it's quite simple. I would say to the two of them, what is it that you two can uniquely do together that the world of tomorrow needs? Not that your electorate want, but that the world of tomorrow needs.
So what are you getting to the topic of gender specifically? And I've been taking a stand in this world of around this topic of peace building, that actually empowering women is probably the most impactful peace building initiative that we can take. What do you think? Because there are a lot of obstacles for women, even though there have been a lot of gains, a lot of obstacles created by women themselves, created by men, created by competition, for women really truly being partners with men in the workplace. What do you see that men and women as leaders together can do better together than they could do apart or without each other?
Well, let me build from my last comment to that question, because I think what I am saying is that we have to think triangulatedly, not dyadically. That in order to answer the question of, I worked as a consultant to Relate, which is the British Marriage Guidance largest organisation. And what I learned from them is that when they work with couples, they say, we've always got three clients. Mm-hmm. You know, the wife who says, well, we come along because he's so difficult. And the husband who says, well, we come along because she told me to, or, you know, whatever gets enacted. But the third client is the relationship.
Usually the way it goes in therapy, you know.
It can often be the way it goes. But the third client is the most important, which is the relationship. So rather than asking, you know, what do you want from your husband and what do you want from your wife, we have to ask, what is it the relationship needs from the two of you? We have to think purpose back. So that notion of thinking in triangles, it's no good just getting women onto the top team or onto the board, but to ask the question, what can we do now that we've got that diversity here that we couldn't do before? Mm-hmm. It has to be purpose-driven, not representationally driven, if that makes sense.
Total sense. Yeah, it makes total sense.
And what's the, you know, I talk about requisite diversity, which is...
You mean statistics?
Well, not just statistics, but linked to that. I say, you know, a leadership team. So when I work with a leadership team, I get them to do a lot of work about who is their work in service of, who are the stakeholders, and how are we co-creating value and with all those stakeholders. And that may include investors, but also employees, customers, partner organizations, communities in which we operate, the more than human world, the environment. And so, you know, there's at least 6 basic stakeholder groups. And what is it we receive from each of those and what is it we give back? So I've chaired a couple of small companies, and every year as the chairman, I've always done an annual report that reports what do we take from each of those groups, the environment, the employees, the communities where we operate, the investors, the customers, the partners, and what added value have we created for them? Mm-hmm. So that we were really accountable to all of those people. And by the way, I now add 2 other stakeholder groups. One is our collective grandchildren, because in any organization, we are making decisions today that future generations will be living with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that whole sense of what is it that we need, what's the legacy we need to leave the generations coming after us is so critical. You know, there was a great, I was on the platform with a Native American tribal leader who had this fantastic line. He said, "We believe that true leadership is when you make a decision with the 7 generations that come before you, mm-hmm. the 7 generations that come after you, and all living beings that you share this moment in time with." Mm-hmm. And I thought, wow, we're not even in the foothills of leadership.
Yeah, right.
So I always now bring in, and I do this literally sometimes when I'm working with boards, I will have empty chairs with the name of these stakeholders on them, the environment, the customer, the employee. And when there are difficult decisions to be made, I'll get non-executive directors to get out of their own chair and go and sit in the place of the grandchildren or the place of the customer,
right.
or the place of the investor.
Right.
So that we are actively, even if we haven't got the representation in the room, we're bringing those stakeholder voices into the room. And when I talk about requisite variety, I always say, look, the requisite diversity, we need the same mixture of diversity in the leadership team that are there in our stakeholder world.
Which means everybody, probably. I mean, I don't know.
Well, it means much greater diversity than is normally there. You know, I can remember going back to first working with organizations 1970s and 1980s and working a lot with hospitals and social work. I was working with one large social work agency where most of the clients were women, right? And they were dealing with a lot with family issues and women, and most of the staff were. And the whole of the top team were men, white, pale, male, grey men. You know, and I think I've done a lot of work with the large professional services firms, you know, the PwCs and Ernst & Young and Deloitte and KPMG, and with each of those in the 1990s and the early part of this century, I have taken on confronting them about their institutional sexism and racism. Yeah. Which of course they get very defensive to. But I think it's my job as another pale male grey man to confront not just individual sexism and racism, but that which is institutionalized. Yeah.
Yeah.
And to which they are willfully blind. So, but coming on to your, so I think these issues are important. And I think what it does mean is that, and I'm acutely aware of this at the moment because my wife's writing a book on white privilege. And how do we face up to the fact that as white people, we have created these labels for ethnic groups. We've created the divisions. We've created the boundaries in countries. And we have lived economically off the benefits of putting ourselves at the top of the pyramid. And that we still today are economically living off a legacy of white colonization, slavery, exploitation of other parts of the world. Yeah. And what she's saying is that actually, unless we could really face that, we are like a kind of addict who's still in denial. Mm-hmm. And I think the same is true for men in relationship to women. The work we have to do as men is to actually look at what's the hidden privilege of being a man, the hidden privilege of being white. So a simple exercise in the race area is to get white people to write down they have just because of the color of their skin.
Sorry, repeat that because you just disappeared for a second. To have people say a simple exercise.
To write down how many privileges they can think of.
Yeah.
That they just have given to them because they're white.
Right.
Yeah. And most people struggle to get beyond 3, 4, 5. You know, your listeners could try it as an exercise.
Right.
And then my wife will produce a list of 48, you know, which include things like you could be elected president of America without someone saying, haven't you done well given that you're black?
Right.
That you can read history books and recognize that most of the people in there are the same color that you are. You know, there are so many the privileges that come that, you know, in the UK, one of the places that middle class people take their families to are National Trust historic houses. And it doesn't take long to find out that 90% of those have been built off the proceeds of slavery.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the same with men, you know, how do we become aware of, because as the dominant class, whether it's men or whether it's white people, so much of that privilege is hidden to you. You just take it for granted.
So, Peter, what do you do organizations obviously care a lot about competition. And you and I have spent a lot of time focusing on the benefits of collaboration and helping people understand that collaborative intelligence. And yet, you know, there's still this tension. Women bear children. They go to work, you know, so how do organizations deal with that fundamental tension about how do they create a culture where women really can thrive and also bear children, raise children well, but also be on top teams, not hurt their children as a result? I mean, obviously, we immediately get into the crunch or the place between the systems, between families and organizations the minute we ask this question. But, you know, there's sort of a backdrop there for a lot of organizations is, yeah, but, you know, this is a competitive world out there. How am I going to stay really competitive and make this happen? What's the advantage to me, really?
So, two levels of response, Susan. The first one is that in dealing with diversity 001, we talk about how do we try and get more equality in terms of competing without looking at the fact it's how can they compete in a world defined by rules made for men. So your issue about you know, many companies say, all right, you know, we'll make sure that we have equality of shortlists and interview procedures and political correctness. But we fail to look at that actually the whole career design model is designed for 20th century men, not 21st century diverse human beings. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We have the same problem with that with millennials, because in a lot of those big partner organizations, a lot of millennials are saying, but we don't want to be partner. That no longer motivates us. We want a different career structure. Mm-hmm. So then you have to start thinking. And by the way, it's no longer a career structure that works for men, because we design a career structure whereby people take more and more and more and more responsibility and have more and more pressure, and then suddenly stop. And what we know is that's the thing that most creates a shortage of the amount of how long you live. Mm-hmm. So you know, we've been working with some organizations about how do we think totally different about designing the organizational career structure for one that embraces diversity, and even in the leadership, how do we have people do their peak responsibility in their 40s and 50s, but then not suddenly leave, but go into a period of eldership and mentoring.
Right.
so that we have a curve where you don't have to end sort of at the peak and you're most responsible and earning the most, but you can have, because we know that's the best for longevity and we know it's the best for diversity.
Or you can also let, for instance, women, I think often can sometimes peak later because they get slowed down. And
and some people need to have their career breaks in the middle because of family, and that applies to both genders, by the way.
Right.
Yeah. That want to take time off for family involvement in the middle. And I do recognize there's a biological difference, but I think we need to build in so much richer career path diversity. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah.
Now the second level I wanted to come to was the thing about competition.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at a deeper philosophical level, we are in the West still stuck misunderstanding Darwin.
Say more.
When Darwin talked about the survival of the fittest, all the writings of neo-Darwinism have taken that into, we live in a competitive world and it's the one who is the most fit that wins out, and the selfish gene and all that writing. But what Darwin was talking about is that the unit of survival is not the individual, is not the team, is not the organization, is not the tribe, is not the country. That is not the unit of survival, and therefore it's also not the unit of flourishing. So we still live in a world which believes that you have to compete to be, the most attractive, the one earning the most, the one who gets the promotion, that's not. So to talk about great leaders, excellent organizations, making America great again, or putting the great back into Great Britain, they're all bad thinking. They're nonsenses. Right? So
what's the unit of survival?
Because the unit of survival, and therefore the unit of flourishing, is always any one of those, the individual, the team, the family, the organization, in dynamic co-creation with its ecological niche. So you can't talk about a great team. You can only talk about a team that is co-creating value with and for all its stakeholders.
Yeah.
You can't save a species. That's nonsense as well. Otherwise, you end up with a couple of specimens in a zoo. All you can do is you can attend to the dynamic co-creation of species and their ecological niche.
So really looking at the places of interdependence and as you say, I think you are always coaching in between the spaces of interdependence, or where the connections happen more than the.
So it's a nonsense to go and coach a team. You have to coach a team's dynamic co-creation with all its stakeholders. You have to coach the relationships, not the relator or the parties.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Totally.
You can't consult to an organization. So I say, with coaches, whether they're individual coaches, team coaches, or organizational consultants, don't make the client the person in front of you. Don't face them and ask them what they want from the consultant or the coach No, go to shoulder with them, ask them who they're there to serve, and make their stakeholders your client and make them your partner. Beautiful. Now we're back to the triangle. We're back to the triangle of we can only be collaborative if there is something we're jointly in service of. And that ultimately, all of evolution is built on collaboration, not competition. Mm-hmm. But the whole individualistic, growth-addicted Western society of the last 200 years has built this whole way of understanding Darwin, which is false.
Excellent. Thank you. So, I'm paying attention to time, as we have to do in these podcasts. And I wanted your, there are a couple of questions that I have that interest me, and maybe I'll say them and then you can respond in terms of what interests you the most. I'm interested in your I don't know exactly, you've had a lot of experience. You're a more senior person, so you've seen a lot, and you're a guy. So the questions that interest me is sort of like the change that you have seen. And I also am interested in your perspective on what you think men need to be thinking about and what women need to do. And I know you've been talking about this, but I think it's a different path for men and for women. So I'm curious. Maybe I'll go there. What do you think? What would be your advice to men, senior leaders, men in the workforce, blue collar folks? What would be your words of wisdom to them to be thinking about this? All the men that are quaking at the knees, thinking or angry about the focus on women. What do men need to do here? If you can talk about them as such a large group.
Well, I was with let me start again at one level, then go to a deeper level. I was with one of the big professional global service firms only last week. And there was a group of male partners I was working with, and it came up about some of the complaints they were having from the executive assistants and the support staff.
More female, or not necessarily?
Mostly female.
Okay.
And I used the opportunity to say to them, because they were looking at what was the dialogue they needed to be having with that group, yeah, and how they could have that dialogue in a different way. And I said, I hope, given what's happening at the moment in the whole sexual harassment debate, that you are confident that you're creating the conditions where if women are being sexually harassed in your organization, they will come and talk to you before they talk to the press and their lawyers. Because I'm telling you that one of those big professional services firms within the next 6 months will find themselves all over the press for sexual harassment. Yeah. Yeah. And what I believe is it's no good just looking at yourself as an individual and looking, which is important as a man, to look at, well, what have you done which has been exploitative, and to face up to your own denial, not just point the fingers at the Harvey Weinsteins or the more obvious figures. But it's also important not to be a bystander. Mm-hmm. So one of the things we've learned about culture change is if going back 30 years, to try and change sexism in organizations, it wasn't the people telling the sexist jokes you needed to concentrate on. It was the people who were listening to them and feeling uncomfortable, mm-hmm. but doing nothing. Mm-hmm. So that's why I was saying to these men, how confident are you that if women are being sexually harassed, and we know they are, yeah.
We've all been acculturated very deeply for a long time.
So actually, every leader of both genders has a responsibility to make sure that we're opening up the enabling conditions that people can talk about that immediately and internally, yeah, rather than sitting on it for 20 years and it going to the press, because then it all gets into demonization, and certain individuals carry it for the whole collective. But we know it's deeply embedded in the culture, and we all have a responsibility.
And probably what goes along with that, and be equipped to support the person who's coming to talk to you, rather than shaming them, shutting them down, scaring, anything, supporting them in a way that makes sense for the organization.
Yeah. So that's at one level. The other deeper level, I think, for men is my early experience being involved in conferences and alongside some very radical feminists. And I was very struck. It was quite a turning point for me, because I was noticing in this conference how a lot of the men were saying, "Oh, we agree with you. We feel put down as well." And the feminists would say, "Rubbish. You can't know what it's like to be me. Don't bandwagon on our issues." Oh, that was great. Other men would get up and say, "Oh, we agree with you. We think those men are awful as well. Right? We would like to help you." Which is the classic drama triangle of you victim,
right.
Them persecutors, me rescuer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a rubbish response as well. And then the third one, a trap that I saw myself and others falling into was, "Oh, well, perhaps you can help us. Perhaps you women can help us sort out some of our..." And this radical feminist just said, "You just blank off and sort yourselves out. It's not our job." Sexism is not a women's problem. It's a men's problem. Well, racism is not the problem of black people. It's the problem of white people. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, white people and men have to do their work, which is partly facing up to their inherited privilege, how they've been enculturated in an abusive system, and to deal with their guilt and shame about that, and then to find, so what is it we need to do to move on from that?
I think that's so excellent, but I want to say one thing, which is that I do think there are two sides here. I think women also have a lot to do here, in the sense that, I think in pre-talk, I was saying the Eleanor Roosevelt line, no one can, what's her line? No one can disrespect you no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. And there is a way in which I think women also need to, the Me Too, we can ride the Me Too wave, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of work that women need to do to really step into their leadership, to unlearn learned helplessness, there's a lot of ways that I think we still give our power away to men, and it's a deeper thing. And we have a different kind of power, and I think, need to really begin to understand what that is, not do things in what we call man mode, but do things in a different way that works for us and speaks to us. And that's where I think organizations will get a real uplift from men and women working together, when there is that genuine people bringing their real, true gender intelligence to the game.
Yes, and in service of a joint purpose. Right. I keep going back to, but I think what I was speaking to was, yes, of course, women had a lot of work to do about how they were allowing themselves to stay in the inferior position, or play victim, or collude, or all those things. But the work of men, and I think women have done far more work. There were far more women's awareness groups than there were men's groups. And I was involved the first time Robert Bly came to England to look at men's awareness. And I thought his work, because one of the things he was pointing out is that part of the problem for men is, Robert Bly used to say, when you see a group of angry young gang of violent adolescent men, you've got a group that are desperately trying to initiate themselves, because there are no adult men around who are initiating them into malehood. Mm-hmm. And to a certain extent, in the West, we've had generations of absent fathering, partly because of the First and Second World War. So I can remember back going to church in the 1950s, and the church was full of First World War widows. Mm-hmm. Very few elderly men around. Mm-hmm. Yeah, many people of my generation didn't have grandfathers. So we've got that whole legacy of men who went off to war, and then men who got caught up in the corporate existence and were never around at home. And then men who did not stay and do fathering.
You know, it's so moving what you're saying, Peter. And I've so noticed how critical fathers are to women, to their girls. And I think this has been documented, but I've just noticed it in my own experience. I noticed it with the senior leaders and women leaders in Afghanistan, the ones who told me about their fathers that were really behind them, and the ones whose fathers were not. I've noticed it in many, many different sectors that a lot, and I think that women leaders who excel often have a father behind them that is really been encouraging them, deeply encouraging them.
Deeply encouraging them to find their difference and their uniqueness.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are also very powerful father figures who are involved with their daughters, but somewhere the daughter then is never able to leave the father, because part of the father's role is not only to deeply encourage them, but to encourage them to leave and go off and be different.
You are so perceptive. Thank you. So we're pretty much at our witching hour, and I wanted to see if there were any punctuation marks that you wanted to put on this conversation, or things if you want to say anything about your new book, which really sounds exciting, or however you want to conclude. This has been a super interesting conversation, and I really thank you for it. So I don't know, words of wisdom, parting words.
The last, I'd end with two lines. One would be from Gregory Bateson, who says the biggest challenge we have in the world is to change the way we're thinking. Because whether it's the gender issues, the peace issues, the migration issues, the world population issues, or the even bigger challenges of climate change, the only way we're going to solve climate change is by changing what's happening both between our ears, but also it's not shifting just our mindset between our ears, but shifting what's happening between our noses,
mm-hmm.
how we connect with each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the great things we can all think all the time is, in any action we take, is how would I explain this to my granddaughter in 30 years' time? When she turns to me and says, in this period of hyper challenge and hyper connection, what were you doing to leave a better world for us?
Mm-hmm.
So all I'd say to all your listeners is just remember that in whatever we're doing, our collective grandchildren are relying on us.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the ones we're most accountable to.
Beautiful. It's a lovely place to stop. Thank you so much, Peter. Really, it's just a lot of depth to what you said and a lot of wisdom, and I have learned a lot. So I really appreciate your time.
Well, it's been great having this dialogue with you. Thank you, Susan.
So thanks again for listening to the Peace Building Podcast. I'm not sure when Peter's new book will appear in bookstores, but be sure to look for it, and hopefully we'll know about it and let you know. It's called WeQ, The Urgent Need for Developing Collaborative Intelligence. Also want to give a shout out to two people who have been really helping me behind the scenes. One from the beginning, Scott Grunberg, who provides both sound editing and direction on the podcast, hailing from Portland, Maine, really, really helpful to me and this whole endeavor. And then a new person, Stephen Gray, from New Zealand, who is a really talented guy from the peace building field, who just has appeared and has been really helpful. We've been collaborating together and really having a good time doing that. So stay tuned for some upcoming episodes. I'm going to be interviewing Joe Washington, who spent years at the UN Peacekeeping Mission in South Sudan, and that should be a super interesting conversation. And then Scilla Elworthy, who has written a book recently called The Business Plan for Peace, and is a really amazing scholar and can really provide incredible guidance, I think, to us about this whole topic. I believe she's also a Nobel nominee. So stay tuned for those episodes and look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for joining us.